Welcome into the EMA Online podcast. Mason Voth, Alec Bussey from EMA Online with you, where depending on when you listen to this, if it's still March 15th, you can still get signed up with promo code EMA30 for your first 30 days of EMA Online for free. So go and do that. And if you're listening on March 16th, it's only $10 if you sign up on March 16th or after that per month. So not like it's a ton of money. But if you want great coverage of the Cats with plenty of football stuff going on, as spring break right now, but recruiting will pick back up next week as practice will. In addition to that, we also obviously have the NCAA Tournament with a lot of coverage coming your way over the weekend from K-State in Greensboro, where we will see if the Wildcats avoid being the 3 seed that everybody laughs at and loses to Montana State, and then can get a matchup with either Kentucky or Providence in the second round, and whatever else may come out of that. So that is where things stand. And to get you prepared for this NCAA tournament, Alec and I spoke yesterday with Kevin Sweeney, who covers college basketball for Sports Illustrated. Gave us about 30 minutes where he talked about K-State, the East region, and then the NCAA tournament as a whole. A lot of great information in there and a good way to get prepared for not just what K-State might face, but also if you're one of those people that somehow waited until the day before the tournament started to fill out your bracket, maybe some advice in there. And probably a little pep talk to pick Northwestern to beat Boise State in the first round of the tournament. So all that coming up with Kevin Sweeney. And then Alec and I will be back just after that to close up shop and give some final thoughts before K-State takes on Montana State. Welcome into the EMA Online NCAA Tournament preview as we go a little bit deeper into things than what we did on Sunday night with the initial reaction and everything that came out of that. Mason Voth, Alec Bussey here with you from EMA Online and Rivals, joined by Kevin Sweeney of Sports Illustrated as he will talk up some of the East region and other things to watch for in this NCAA tournament with us. I guess I'll start with this. Alec and I have obviously been entrenched in K-State the entire year. And I think you get to a certain point when you follow just one team that you've seen all of the flaws. And so you are much more down on them than what maybe you should be. From a national perspective, how should people view K-State going into this NCAA tournament? And what is your opinion of K-State as it stands right now?
I mean, I think whenever you have two really good players like Johnson and Noel, you have an opportunity to make some noise in this thing. And I think that's, and I think, yes, like you could poke holes in an experienced staff that hasn't, coached but it hasn't been the head coach in an NCAA tournament game or, the rest of the role players, whatever. But like at the end of the day, Jerome Tang's been there and these guys are really talented. That gives you a chance to win. Like I said this to someone a week or so ago, like it's easier to talk yourself out of teams than it is into teams this time of year, right? Like, especially this season with the amount of parity we've had. And so, yeah, it's easy to sit here and say, here's why Kansas State's not going to win the national championship. Here's hole 1, hole 2, hole 3, or not going to make a Final Four. Here's hole 1, hole 2, hole 3. But I think at the end of the day, you can do that with pretty much everybody. And I think if you're Kansas State, you roll into a tournament that feels wide open. You roll into a region that feels pretty wide open with, probably the weakest 1 seed, a number 2 seed that a lot of people think is pretty vulnerable. And you hope for the best. And I think if you're a fan of the team, that's all you could have ever asked for.
Well, I guess I'll take the second question here. When you kind of look at the East region here, Sweeney, from a whole, obviously, like you said there, Purdue, on a lot of people's eyes, is the weakest 1 seed. I think Marquette playing in the Big East, a lot of people maybe don't follow them as closely as other teams that are on the 2 line. From an overall perspective, what is it about this region that makes it really enticing to a lot of people?
It's what's exciting about it is that 5, 6, and 8 in this region are really 5, 6, 7, and 8 are like the biggest brands. Right? You have Duke 5, you have Kentucky 6, you have number 7 Michigan State, and you have an 8 seed Memphis. I mean, those are some of the biggest brands in the sport. That's pretty enticing, pretty exciting. And when you say it's wide open, because Duke's playing really well and Kentucky's started to turn the corner at points, and Michigan State, outside of its Big Ten tournament performance, has been really good in late February. And Memphis just won the AAC, right? Like if you told me any team from 1 through 8 in this on this seed list in the East wins it, I wouldn't be shocked. And I think that's unique to this East, and that's why I'm excited to watch.
Who's the team that you really kind of look at of the teams that you just said as a potential threat to make it to the Sweet 16, Elite 8, or maybe even the Final Four?
That 5 through 8 group?
Yeah.
I think Duke. Part of it's because I think the chance for the bracket to open up, especially if Memphis can pull that upset in the second round that's been much speculated. I also just think Duke's playing really well. They found an identity with Tyrese Proctor and Jeremy Roach driving the ball, and Lively defensively has made some strides. I think for them, because of the injuries, especially early in the season, they just really were learning how to play with one another. And I think as soon as they started to turn a corner, that was when Roach got injured, and they had to deal with that. And I think now that they've had some time together, they've started to play like a team that can make a Final Four. And so I'm pretty bullish. Obviously, the matchup isn't great in the first round with Oral Roberts. That's a really good team with a tremendous guard. And anytime you've got the best guard on the floor, you feel pretty good. And Oral Roberts can have the best guard in most games it plays this tournament. But at the same time, I think overall, I think the matchups for Duke set up pretty well.
Thinking about some of the stuff that's going to take place in Greensboro this week, K-State, Montana State is the 3:14 game. But then the 6:11 game is Kentucky and Providence. And there is a world where K-State is that 3 seed that gets upset by a 14, but they likely shouldn't. Kentucky has had an interesting season. Seemed like things were pretty hot for John Calipari for a little bit there. Then they started to play better. Things cooled off, but they've kind of had some ups and downs with guys on the floor and not available to play. What can you tell us about Kentucky if that would be a second-round matchup for K-State? And then also, I guess, maybe what kind of chance you would give Providence for being that team that's in the second round as opposed to the Wildcats?
I mean, 3 weeks ago, I would have said Providence had a great chance. Providence has just played really poorly here in the last couple of weeks. And so I'm curious to see if they can snap out of it, particularly because now they're dealing with some kind of overwhelming rumors of Ed Cooley, their coach, leaving for the Georgetown job. That doesn't make things any easier at this time of year. So, look, I think Providence has a chance, and Providence is a tough team to beat because they have a tremendous 4-5 duo with Bryce Hopkins and Ed Croswell. They've got experience in the backcourt. They played in the Sweet 16 last year. All those things make them, an attractive team to pull out that upset. But I do think Kentucky's probably favored to win that game for a reason. I think they've started to play a little bit better. Antonio Reeves becoming a consistent scoring threat to go with Case and Wallace has been critical. I don't think this team overwhelms you, and I think overall, I think the biggest weakness for Kentucky all season long has been containing dribble penetration. Like if you put on the film of Kentucky when they played against Vanderbilt in the SEC tournament and watched Ezra Manjon, who's an undersized 5'10" point guard, just drive them all day, put Oscar in ball screens and just make plays. Like that's something that you feel is probably pretty repeatable for K-State in that matchup with Marquise Noel and getting downhill and spraying at the shooters and getting guys involved. Like I think that's something you feel pretty good about matchup wise, but at the same time, they put a lot of pressure on you because of Sheboy's ability at the rim rebounding the ball and their size, length, physicality. So not an easy 3-6 game potentially by any means for K-State, but I do think that the matchup does set up well for a guy like Marquise Noel to really feast.
How much pressure do you feel like John Calipari is feeling heading into this NCAA tournament? I don't think they've won an NCAA tournament game since 2018, 2019, obviously coming off the St. Peter's loss last year, 2-15 upset. And then, the year before that, they didn't make the NCAA tournament during the COVID season. So how much pressure is he feeling as he enters this NCAA tournament with a roster that has largely underachieved based off what the preseason expectations were?
I think there's always pressure at Kentucky, right? Like I don't think that it's unique that you enter the NCAA tournament in Kentucky expecting to not just win a game, but win several in advance. But I do think we'd be naive if we didn't act like there was a little extra here, given the St. Peter stuff. And to not get out of the first weekend would be, a huge disappointment. Now, does that mean he's getting fired? No, I don't think so. Does that mean he's dishing out for Texas? No, I still don't think so. But without question, things have gotten a little bit toxic there, and he needs a deep run to kind of quiet those murmurs and get everyone back in line. And so it's obviously a huge tournament for Cal.
From my perspective, the biggest key for this Kentucky team to do that is the ability of Reeves, like you said, to shoot it, but also CJ Frederick, who has been in and out of the lineup really since he got to Kentucky last year with injuries. If those two guys are making shots, Sweeney, how good can Kentucky be?
I think it makes them just a lot harder to guard because I think at times when you're lining up Toppin and Livingston and guys like that who are inconsistent shooters, the space for Oscar really limits. It just gets slimmer and slimmer, and it makes it harder for Case and Wallace to do his work. But when Frederick and Reeves and even Toppin, who shot it better lately, when those guys make shots, this is not an easy team to defend because, especially since they've taken Severe Wheeler off the floor for the most part, I think it's made life a little bit easier for Oscar and create a little bit more space offensively for them. So Frederick and Reeves in particular, obviously very important to their team and their ability to make shots.
Other notes in this East region before we kind of move on and we can take a look at some of the other things going on in this NCAA tournament. It's kind of a mix of teams that I think all went through periods of the season where they looked really, really good, and then all have ways that you can kind of poke a hole and see where something went wrong. Obviously, Duke has that stretch. Tennessee, K-State, Kentucky, all a part of that. Even some of these other teams, even Purdue to some extent, had a little bit of a stretch there where things got choppier when it looked like they were cruising as the best team in the country. And I think a lot of people have pegged this as the region where something really wild could happen. What is the craziest outcome that you could see being who wins this region and goes on to the Final Four in Houston?
That's a great question. I think Memphis probably would be like the traditional, like boring, exciting choice, if that makes sense. I think the actual exciting choice is that FAU beats Memphis and then Oral Roberts beats Duke, and then all hell breaks loose at the top. To me, that would be March. Like if we get like FAU Oral Roberts in the Sweet 16, they'd be like 700,000 people watching it on like the ratings would be brutal. But I mean, it'd be great for me. I'd love it. So I think that would be the true like kind of wacky situation. I do think it actually sets up okay for Oral Roberts. Actually, I'm going to amend my statement and say that the most exciting weird thing that could happen would be Oral Roberts versus Purdue in the Sweet 16, and get a repeat of St. Peter's Purdue last year. I think that would be electric in its own way. So I think anything involving FAU and Oral Roberts, these kind of two attractive Cinderellas would be a lot of fun.
We on Selection Sunday went through and I made us go and just take, if we had to rank them in order, the top 4 teams that would be most likely to advance out of this region, who would those 4 teams be in a specific order for you? Because I think if you look at it, at least from my perspective, it wouldn't be by taking just the top 4 seeds in the region like it would be for some others, because Tennessee obviously seems very vulnerable now with Ziegler out. And then obviously there would be reasons to poke holes in K-State and even Marquette or whoever if you wanted to. So I felt it was a fascinating question that I'd throw your way from a national perspective.
So I think number 1 to me would be Marquette. I think there's been a lot of picks. So it's going to knock them out, whatever. And look, I know that there's not great history for these kind of quote unquote breakout teams doing well in March. This has just not generally been something that has gone particularly well for those teams in the setting. I know Ken Pom tweeted out like any team top 2 seed that has started the season outside the AP top 25 has never made the Final Four. I just think Marquette, like every time you look up, everyone's doubting them and they keep winning, right? Like you go in the Big East tournament, the number 1 seed, they won the whole thing by 2 games, and everyone's like, well, UConn's going to beat them. UConn's going to blow by them. UConn's way better than Marquette, no doubt. They beat Marquette, or they beat UConn on a neutral court that's basically a home game for UConn, right? Like that's just how good they've been. That's how been all year, and that's why I'm not going to bet against them. They have great point guard play. They share it. Omax and Oso Aguadero have been really good. Like I think that Marquette's the favorite to win this thing. Number 2 for me would probably be Duke, just because of how well they're playing right now. Number 3 would be Purdue. I have my questions, but it's still a number 1 seed. They won the Big Ten regular season and tournament. They have Zach Edey. And then number 4 would probably be K-State to me. You could maybe argue. I just think they're a little bit better. Like you could toss in Memphis. You could toss out Michigan State. There's certainly some upside there. But I think Kansas State's accomplished enough that, saying they could get to a Final Four is not unrealistic. They should be the 4th team there.
Kevin, I think one of the most interesting games that isn't being talked about enough in the round of 64 is the 7 seed Michigan State, like you said, they're against 10 seed USC. This is a USC team that I really like. Vince the Prince is one of my favorite freshmen in the country since he's come back. Mason hates the nickname, doesn't stay up late.
I don't hate the nickname. I hate that you use it so often as a guy that should have no reason to enjoy Pac-12 basketball.
everyone has a reason to enjoy Pac-12 basketball. It's college basketball. But since he's come back, they have an 11-5 record. I really like some of their guard play with Boogie Ellis. He's a bucket. Drew Peterson is battling some back issues. Is there a possibility that either Michigan State or USC does upset Marquette in the round of 32?
I mean, it's certainly a possibility, right? Like, it's March, but I think Michigan State certainly played well, and I think USC has been written off in the first round because of the Peterson issues, injury-wise, and because you're playing Michigan State. Like, people don't like picking against Izzo in the NCAA tournament, even though the record is not actually that good, especially lately. People are just like, I'm not doing it. Actually, I understand that. I'm picking Michigan State, so who am I to throw stones? But I do think USC is probably a little bit more dangerous than people realize, just because Boogie Ellis can really, really score. Peterson's one of the more versatile players in the country, and I think that's a really good job of picking mismatches. And then their rim defense is really, really good with Morgan and with Iwachukwu down low. And I think that combination is really, really valuable. And I think it gives USC a chance to win that game. So it wouldn't shock me at all if Marquette doesn't make it out of the first weekend. It wouldn't shock me at all if Marquette makes the Final Four. It's kind of the beautiful thing about March Madness.
Expanding out to the rest of the field now and what else is going on. This very well could be a symptom of being too close to it as well. I think that can be another trap that people fall into. It's not just the school that you follow and like, it's also the schools around them. So the other Big 12, you can either be too high or too low on. Baylor is a team that I think I might be too low on right now. After watching how they've played the last couple of weeks, I'm pretty convinced that they're going to lose to Creighton in the second round. Is that wrong of me to assume? And what are your thoughts on Baylor heading into this NCAA tournament? Because they certainly don't seem like a team that could get back to a Final Four this year.
Yeah, I mean, defensively, they've just been a wreck. And I think there was optimism that, like right now we're struggling defensively because we don't have Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua. We get him back, we get him integrated, and we'll be fine. It's been the opposite. They've been worse. And part of that's the small guards, and part of that's no Jerome Tang, right? Jerome Tang was the architect of their defense. He's gone now. They're learning on the fly how to adjust to that. I think they are probably ticketed for a potential first weekend exit. Quite frankly, like, I don't think people have talked enough about how bad a matchup UC Santa Barbara is for them. UC Santa Barbara's whole thing is that their guards are elite at dribble penetration, and their big guy came from Cal and was like a 13-8 guy in the Pac-12. Seems like a really bad matchup for a Baylor team that is in the bottom 50 in the country in 2-point defense. Like they're gonna Baylor might win that game, but they're gonna have to score 90 to do it because they're not getting many stops. So I'm excited about that first weekend pod for them. I think it could be really dicey. I mean, look, it's hard. It's hard to write off a Scotch-Rue team that has 3 really high-level guards, but I just think the way that they played recently is not inspiring any confidence.
Is there a team that is a double-digit seed that you feel confident can make it to the Sweet 16? I know this is a popular question every single year, but if you had to tab one or two of them, who would it be and why?
I like the pod that features 12 seed Drake and 13 seed Kent State. I think both of those teams have the potential to get there. And I think Kent State, not K-State. Geez, we're a K-State podcast.
There are 3 K-States in the field this year: Kennesaw State, Kansas State, and Kent State. So
it's the year of the K-State. It's the year of the Purple Wildcats with Northwestern in the field as well. So I think Kent State matches up pretty well with Indiana because they have a guard who can deal with Jalen Hood-Schifino, and that's the way that generally has neutralized Indiana is when Hood-Schifino hasn't played really well. They've hung in already this year with Houston and Gonzaga. That's a pretty good recipe in my opinion. Like if you can do that, you can win this thing in March. And so I think Kent State and then Drake, who I saw at the Valley tournament a week and a half ago now, they're just so old. They're starting point guard and shooting guard, both graduated high school in 2016, which is bananas. Like how are we doing it? But they're so old.
Years older than I am.
Yes. They're 2 starting backcourt guys. They're both 25. Their only guy who wasn't around when they were in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago is the son of the coach, who's also an NBA prospect, in Tucker DeVries. So they're really talented. They're really old. They're really well coached, and they get a Miami team in the first round that might be shorthanded with Noor Chadomir out. So I think if you're looking for a team that can make a run, pick one of those 2 and hope that they ride it through the Albany pod and get out to the Sweet 16.
All right, so I'm an idiot for thinking Indiana can make it to the Final Four out of this region.
I actually think that if Indiana can survive Kent State, and I actually got some kind of pushback into the field at the other day, if they can get by Kent State, they might make the Final Four. And someone texted me "Are you crazy? You just said that the only thing standing in between Indiana and a Final Four is Malik Jacobs." And I said, "Yeah, I know I said that. I kind of believe it. I don't think they should be that afraid of Houston. I think they can win that game. I think they can hang. I am just very worried about how they match up with Kent State, and that's the tricky thing. So it could be boom or bust for the Hoosiers.
Looking at that same region, Colgate seems to be a 15 seed that people seem to kind of be tabbing to potentially upset Texas, considering they're the number 1 3-point shooting team in the country. Is that something that you can kind of see happening, or are you riding with the backcourt of Texas and the depth that Texas has this season?
I think it could. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to say it's going to. That'd be a pretty strong opinion to have. But I think, look, Colgate's been in the NCAA tournament each of the last 3 tournaments. They played Tennessee in 2019. They led in the second half. They played Arkansas in 2021. They led in the second half. They played Wisconsin in 2022. You guessed it. They led in the second half. They've been in all these games. They've got a tremendous coach. They shoot the 3 at an incredibly good clip. And the way that they move and cut and share the ball is really impressive. That is not an easy prep. I almost liken it to, if you're a football team, you have to play a triple option team. You might win the game, but it's going to be a hellish week of practice to get there. And I kind of think the same thing about this Colgate Texas game. I think Colgate is an underseed at the same scale that Middle Tennessee was in 2016 when they beat Michigan State. I truly think they're that good. I think they got completely jobbed by the committee. I hope that they win the game anyway. But if they don't, obviously, I do expect them to hang in. But I do think a good push from Colgate could be detrimental for Texas's hopes of making a run, because they're in a tough pod overall, because Penn State and Texas A&M are both playing really, really well. Texas A&M is a top 10 team in the country in the last 2 months. That's not a game you want to have to play in the second round. So if I'm Texas, I'm looking at the committee what did we do here? This is terrible. So yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Colgate's in that game in the second half and people are on upset watch.
Speaking of people that feel like they got jobs, KU felt like that they should have been in the Midwest region. And instead of getting Kansas City for a second weekend, they'll end up out in Las Vegas. What are your thoughts on Kansas entering this NCAA tournament and where their chances sit in their region of the West? And also, I guess, who could be there as a possible detriment to them getting back to the Final Four?
I mean, the road isn't easy, right? You have UCLA, you have Gonzaga, you have UConn, you have lower seeds like Arkansas and Illinois and Rick Pitino at Iona, right? It's not an easy run. If you're Kansas, I still think they're a really good team, right? Really outside of the 2 Texas games, I've thought that they have been incredibly impressive. The way that they share the basketball, KJ Adams as a weapon, I think, is something that's very difficult for teams to deal with the short roll passing and creation he's able to do. And Jalen Wilson's been consistent as a scorer, and I think you need that type of guy in March. Obviously, Bill Self's health, a little bit of a concern. I want to see him on the sideline before I say, yeah, Kansas is going to win the national championship again. It's really hard to do it twice, but I think this team is certainly good enough to navigate these waters. I wouldn't love where I was seated, where I was placed in the regions, both because of the travel and because of the fact that you got to play Gonzaga potentially or UCLA to get to the Final Four. But I think people are writing off Kansas a bit too early, given how good that they've been this season.
You mentioned writing off there. UCLA is a team that feels like they've been written off since Jalen Clark's injury. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like he's going to come back. And then Adeem Bona doesn't necessarily have full health right now concerning the shoulder injury I think he suffered in the Pac-12 title game. UCLA is a team that I was really high on entering the Pac-12 tournament. Really enjoyed watching them. They're tough as nails. They play incredibly physically. Is there a reason that I should not buy UCLA? Because I still want to pick them to go to the Elite Eight, potentially the Final Four, but Gonzaga is really tough. We talked about Kansas on the top half, UConn on the top half of the region. It's hard for me to quit on this UCLA team because I just love the way that Tiger Campbell, Jaime Jaquez play, and they're just tough as nails.
They're a lot like Kansas last year, in my opinion, where you watch them minute to minute and you're not like, wow, look at that guy and that guy and that guy. And look how explosive they are, how good they can be. But they are tough to kill, man. They really are. And the fact that they were in that game as well as they were against Arizona on a neutral court, they should have won that game. Really, they had Courtney Raymond makes a really tough shot and wins the game for Arizona. If not, UCLA's Pac-12 champion, maybe a 1 seed. So, I wouldn't quit on him. Yeah, the Jalen Clark injury is huge. I mean, no like the statistical stuff. If you look, they're just a different team when he's out there than when he isn't. But Jaquez and Campbell are outstanding. Bailey, I think, is starting to play with a little more confidence. I know it's game to game with him, but I think he's starting. I think in some ways an injury like this can kind of be beneficial for a kid like that, where it frees him up to just say, hey, go make plays. That's what he's best at. So, yeah, I mean, it's not an easy road, but I do think they have a pretty solid path out of the first weekend, if nothing else. And then you're 2 wins away from Houston.
You're not picking your alma mater?
I'm not. I give them credit. They've had a great year, but I would be pretty surprised if they were somehow able to beat UCLA. UCLA is they're the most competitive team in the country, and that's an underrated skill.
I actually a couple of weeks ago I mentioned to Alec and another guy that works for us, Gabe. I said that Arizona was a team that I was really starting to buy in on. And then I watched that Pac-12 championship between them and UCLA. And even though UCLA ended up winning it, I felt much better about undermanned UCLA than I did the way Arizona played. And I'm back in on UCLA and what they could do. But kind of what you talked about with Kansas, they've got a really tough region with all these different teams that can get it done. Obviously, we know KU. UConn is a team that at one point people were talking up left and right. Then they really sunk down, but they still have all those pieces in place there. So I think that's going to be a really fascinating one to follow. Real quick before we let you go, moving up to the top of this thing, where Alabama sits. We'll get your thoughts on everybody else there in a moment, but Alabama being the number 1 overall seed, picking up some steam and probably being a very popular pick to win it all. I love the way Alabama plays basketball. Again, just basketball purposes, nothing else that goes on at Alabama. The way that they play offense has always spoke to me, but now this year they're actually playing even better defense than they are offense. And even though I've told myself I'll never pick Alabama to win in the tournament because of that, it seems like it's different this year. So Alabama as a favorite, or maybe the favorite to win this NCAA tournament, is that something that people should actually believe they can get done this season?
I think so. I think the biggest thing with Alabama is they have a lot more ways to beat you than people realize, right? Like people think, oh, they're going to go out, they're going to take a million threes. And yeah, like they're going to take 30 threes. And there's going to be a game when they make 4 of them. There's going to be one game in the NCAA tournament where Alabama shoots really poorly from 3. And they're going to have to survive that game. But I think because they're good defensively, their bigs are monsters in drop coverage. They're, Brandon Miller's gotten much better driving the basketball and creating for himself. They've got just a multitude of weapons. Quinterly's been playing better lately. Like I think they have the recipe where, look, they might lose because they're having a cold shooting day. That's how it works for anyone in the NCAA tournament. But I don't think they're doomed if they have a bad shooting day. And I think 2 years ago they probably were.
You look at the bottom of this region, the bottom of the South, I see a lot of points being scored with Arizona, Utah State, Mizzou, Baylor, Creighton. NC State has 2 good guards that I think could potentially really hurt Ryan Kalkbrenner in drop coverage. Of those teams in the bottom half, which one are you the most confident can make it to the Elite Eight and play against Alabama? Because I think everyone kind of is writing Alabama to the Elite Eight at this point.
I think Arizona. I mean, Arizona's been really good in its biggest games. Like they have consistently raised their game in big moments this season and played really, really well. To get 2 out of 3 against UCLA is a big deal. To just, I think, be like Creesa to me is so inconsistent that it's hard for me to get and their guards generally. It's not just Kerr, but I think their guards are inconsistent enough that it's hard for me to say, yeah, they can win 6, but can they win 3? Yeah, I think they can. And get into the Alabama game. And if you get an Alabama-Arizona game, that might be the game of the tournament, just in terms of the pace, the energy, the level of athleticism and talent on the floor. I mean, that would be an outstanding game with a lot on the line.
Then looking at the Final Four, who do you pick to go to the Final Four, and then who in the national championship over who?
So I have Alabama, Marquette, Houston, and Gonzaga. On national championship game, Alabama and Houston. I know that's really boring. I'm sorry, but it's just kind of what I came up. I didn't go in planning on picking Houston. It just kind of came out that way. But Alabama and Houston to the Final Four, and then Alabama winning it all. So
I think Houston has to get there. It's in Houston. Jim Nance's Final Four. It would make too much sense for them at least to get to Houston for that. I don't know if they win it all because, like I said, I've got Alabama as well. Alec doesn't want to divulge his winner yet, I guess. He hasn't decided
yet. I know who I'm doing. I'm doing two different brackets, one for a group of people and then one for another group of people. The one that has money on the line, I'm putting Houston as a national champion because I understand how bracket pools work and Alabama's most popular champion. So I'm going to swerve a little bit, play the game a little bit, and pick Houston because they're just not as popular of a national champion pick. But that makes me really want to swerve and pick a team like Kansas that no one's going to pick. So we'll see. I think I'm going to pick Alabama and the one that doesn't involve money, and Houston the one that does involve money, though.
That's savvy. The savvy stuff right there.
I try to be savvy every now and then. You got to zig when other people zag, and you got to zag when people zig.
Quick Northwestern story for you. 2017, I was a freshman in college at KState. I went up to Valparaiso, Indiana, to see one of my buddies that was going to school up there. But I took the train to Chicago to get up there. And when I got off, somebody comes up to me and they start talking to me about the NCAA tournament. And I'm wearing a K-State pullover, and guy comes up, starts talking, and he's like, "Oh man," he's like, "that was a crazy game." And was talking about, I was like, "Yeah, I mean, they won the first four, but they couldn't beat Cincinnati in the first round." Like talking to him about K-State. This guy clearly doesn't know ball. And he says to me, he's like, "Yeah, and there was that kid crying after the game." And I was like, "Oh, you're talking to me about Northwestern, not K-State." Okay, I get where the confusion is coming from at this point now. So that's the only time I've ever worried about Northwestern basketball. So what should people know about Northwestern basketball this year?
They came out of nowhere. They have two tremendous guards in Boo Buie and Chase Audige. They double the post on every single post catch.
They're very good at it.
They're very good at it, but also they just dare everyone to make open threes, and no one does. Look, I will say on a more humorous note, I got into Northwestern the day after they beat Vanderbilt in the first round of the NCAA tournament. They then lost in heartbreaking fashion against Gonzaga, and the program went completely down the tubes ever since. So I'm considering myself bailed out of me having quote unquote broken Northwestern basketball because they're now back in the NCAA tournament. And Bowie's an elite college guard and a lot of fun to watch. So if you're looking for a weird bandwagon to hop on, you can join the Boo Buie train.
All right. Well, Kevin, we appreciate you joining us today. We'll let you get out of here and on to whatever else you have planned. But a real quick plug where people can find you and what you have going on all throughout the NCAA tournament.
Yep. All of our stuff over at sportsillustrated.si.com. Excited about all of our college hoop stuff this month. Also find me on the Field 68 After Dark show. We've got some great shows ahead and great people, Jeff Goodman, Rob Doster, and Terrence Oglesby, and RC, and all these guys. I mean, it's tremendous stuff. I don't think there's a better place to talk college ball than Field 68, so check us out.
All right, awesome. We appreciate it. We will hopefully talk to you sometime down the line.
Appreciate it, guys.
All right, we appreciate Kevin Sweeney for joining us on the EMA Online podcast, getting ready for the NCAA tournament. Mason and Alec back here now, ready to give our final thoughts before the trek to Greensboro begins and to expect on Friday with Montana State. We kind of gave our instant thoughts on Sunday, but now that there's been more time to digest what Montana State is, and I know that people who are listening to this right now, if you haven't seen it, go to the site and watch the film room that Alec did on Montana State's top player, Raekwon Battle. What are some of your thoughts from watching Montana State, or specifically Battle, to get ready for this game for the Wildcats?
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways I had from watching just a few clips of Battle is he's really quick. He's really fast, especially in the open floor. He's going to be able to get to the rim. There was one specific play that I highlighted. Didn't do anything particularly special on the play, but he did a really good job of just running for a loose ball, which in the NCAA tournament, every possession seems to mean that much more because the games are really close. So things like that are impressive to me. But when you talk about what Montana State did in the half court, I feel like they ran a lot of sets. They ran a lot of plays. And that's something that a lot of high major teams don't do a ton of, especially in half court situations. I know that's something that a lot of Big 12 teams don't do a ton of, is run a ton of sets. Now, when you get to, baseline out of bounds plays, sideline out of bounds plays, the coaches will get involved there and run more sets. But a lot of times, and this is a surprise to a lot of college basketball fans, I think, Mason, is coaches don't have their offenses run a ton of sets because they want their players to be able to kind of control the flow of the game. And this is a Montana State team that I got a vibe just from watching some of their film that they do run a lot of sets. And that can make it a little bit more difficult to defend just because sets are often designed to get a couple players shots or get an open look at the rim for a layup. So you kind of put all those things together and it becomes difficult, I think, in certain areas to defend this Montana State team. And there's other players that we can talk about a little bit later, but Raekwon Battle is really impressive to me on the film. Really fast, good shooter. There's some good numbers in there, advanced numbers in that story that I talked about that make him a dangerous offensive player. And I do think he's a potential difficult matchup for this K-State team because they don't necessarily have someone who is of a similar size and speed as him. And I think in an ideal world, Jerome Tang would probably like to put Keontae Johnson on him. But as we've seen this year, Keontae Johnson maybe isn't the most willing defensive player a lot of times. And I question if Keontae Johnson is quick enough to stay in front of Raekwon Battle as well. So not to say that one player can beat you, but there are certain areas of Raekwon Battle's game that I do think are probably creating some headaches for K-State staff as they really dive into the scout of the Bobcats.
Yeah, I mean, I think not only is Raekwon Battle the best player for Montana State, but like you're saying, he's probably the greatest matchup question mark that they're going to bring to the table against K-State because he's going to play as a guard, but he's 6'5". And as we are well aware, K-State's best defensive guard, which is Marquise Noel, he's a little short of 6'5", if you believe it or not. He doesn't quite hit that number. So there will be a size advantage there for Battle on Noel. And we'll just see how Noel's able to stack up. Because, I mean, maybe there are some other guys in the Big 12, but I can't think of anybody off the top of my head right now that Noel would have defended on a consistent basis like that this year, at least that has the skill set of Battle. We saw a couple times K-State did some things differently where Noel or some of the smaller guys ended up on bigger dudes for other teams, but that was more just to harass them around the perimeter, and then they were handed off. So I think K-State defensively will be fascinating to watch to see how they try and match up with him. And, I mean, I don't know. I guess maybe we see them try a couple of different things and tinker around there, but should be fascinating to watch. I think to me, the one thing to note is K-State is taking care of business this year against most teams like Montana State, where, yes, Montana State, you can't take them for granted, but at the end of the day, you can look at them and say K-State is clearly the better team. They've been able to do pretty well in those. Now, we saw the slip-ups on the road to Oklahoma and Texas Tech. Those were games that you felt pretty bad about at the time. But, I mean, both of those teams were better probably than Montana State was. And I go back to some of what we saw in the non-conference from K-State where they had some games where, like, you think of the Radford game before Christmas break where they were just kind of sleepwalking through that game. They found a way through it, or some of the games that took place in the Cayman Islands. Like, they found a way to get through those. I think that's ultimately probably what we see here from K-State. I don't think Montana State is a team that they're going to blow out by 30-some, which is kind of what Texas Tech did last year. I think that this is probably a game where K-State slowly builds like a 15-point lead, and maybe it comes down below that sometimes. But for the most part, K-State's probably just going to be somewhere right around there. And you take a win and walk out of there happily without having to worry too much, because that's really all this that matters. We've seen it with a lot of teams before that they get scared in that first game, but then they're fine afterwards. You can even take reference for what took place in like the conference tournaments. Like Marquette, for example, they almost lost to St. John's their first game in New York. And if they had lost that game, that tournament goes totally differently. But instead they won, and then they just blew out their next two opponents on way to winning the thing. So just it's the cliche, but it's the truth. Like, survive and advance. And as long as you're surviving, your fans are going to be happy, and not much bad is going to come from it. So I'll be fascinated to see what K-State does. And the other thing that to me stands out about what we're going to have to pay attention to, I know that you've talked about it a lot, and it's been covered in some different areas by people nationally, but the fact that K-State has very little experience playing on this stage. We know that Desi Sills is the only guy that had made it deep and saw action in an NCAA tournament. That was 2021 with Arkansas. He was actually knocked out of the tournament by Jerome Tang and Baylor. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how guys handle it. Now, some of the dudes, maybe that they're not overwhelmed by it, like it's just another game for them. But I feel like a guy like Marquise Noel is one that he's going to border on being too amped up or feeling all this pressure versus just going out there and playing his game. So I'm most fascinated to see how a bunch of dudes without experience playing in the NCAA tournament get thrust into the spotlight and what that does for them.
Yeah, and I think you can even take that a little bit further. And, Kevin Sweeney talked about it briefly in our conversation with him about how little experience K-State's players have in the NCAA tournament. But I think it's maybe even of greater concern how little experience K-State's coaching staff has at this point. Of course, Jerome Tang has never been a head coach before, and he does have a national title under his belt as an assistant coach at Baylor. But there's a lot more responsibility that comes and a lot more understanding that you're the one who's going to be at fault if things don't go the way you want them to if you're the head coach in the NCAA tournament. But if you look even further to K-State's staff, Dream Dowling has never coached in an NCAA tournament. Rodney Perry has never coached in an NCAA tournament, and they've never coached at this level before. They've never coached at a Power 5 school before. So that is certainly something that, I don't know if they're handling the scout from Montana State or not, but that's certainly something that does present a challenge because handling scouts at this time of the year is difficult. It's a really quick turnaround. Yeah, the turnaround from Selection Sunday to playing on Thursday or Friday is not, but the turnaround of playing on Thursday or Friday and then going to Saturday or Sunday is really quick. And my guess is that Kansas State staff probably already has their scouting report completed for the potential of playing Providence or Kentucky. But it's different this time of the year because you just have less time to do it. You're focused on a lot more things. You're trying to make sure your players are knowledgeable about their opponent. You're trying to make sure that you're knowledgeable about the opponent that you're going to have to play. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jerome Tang is taking a larger emphasis in this time of the year when it comes to scouting and having an understanding of what needs to be done to be successful, because quite honestly, I think it's fair to question if his coaching staff knows what needs to be done to be successful at this time of the year because they don't have the experience. Like, you can hear about it from all your friends in the industry. You can hear about it from Jerome Tang, but I think the best way to kind of learn to be successful in life in a lot of different areas, and in the NCAA tournament in particular, is to simply just keep doing it and to continue to get better at it, continue to gain experience with it. And I would say the same thing about every coaching staff. I think that a lot of times you see players and programs and coaches get to NCAA tournaments for the first time as a group, and they don't last very long, or they get overwhelmed by the moment, or they get too tight, and they get bounced early. I think about some of the struggles that Jay Wright had in his early tenure at Villanova. Tony Bennett had similar struggles at Virginia, I believe. And I know Matt Painter has struggled with it at times too, and he obviously has yet to make it to a Final Four, despite the amount of success that he has had as Purdue's head coach. Now, there's also coaches, who have a ton of success their first time in the NCAA tournament. People like Shaka Smart goes to a Final Four. Hubert Davis last year goes to the national championship game. But it's difficult when you don't have a lot of previous experience and previous learning experiences to rely on to become better at what it is that you're trying to be successful at. So I'm interested to see how the coaching staff handles this. And Jerome Tang has talked a lot about how he has a ton of confidence in this coaching staff. But I did find it interesting, Mason, how after the Big 12 tournament lost to TCU, he said, we didn't have them ready to play. They weren't understanding of what the Big 12 tournament was and what comes with the Big 12 tournament from a physicality standpoint and many other details. So I think this week in between is a good opportunity for Tang, his staff, and his players to really kind of get an understanding of, this is understanding the finality of it, the abruptness of the end of what a loss can do to your season.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, maybe for the sake of that they didn't feel like they were ready for it, the loss to TCU and feeling underprepared maybe helps them for the NCAA tournament. I mean, this staff does have some guys that have that experience. Obviously, Jerome Tang has seen the process of a ton of NCAA tournaments. York Maligi, I mean, he had experience last year with Texas. They actually played much better against Purdue last year than I thought Texas would. And then like Dream Dowling, he was on the staff that took North Texas to the NCAA tournament, and they beat Purdue back in that was like 2019. So I think that there are guys with the experience, but I think that trying to determine the level of experience that they have now in the roles that they possess, and also trying to figure out with a first-time head coach how that's going to play out. And for Jerome Tang, like I think for him, it's about determining not just, okay, what happens in game, but what are you doing before the game? And then if you win against Montana State, what are you doing after the game? And how are you setting things up for that day in between before you play on, I don't know, a Sunday afternoon or whatever it may end up being timing wise? These are all questions that they're going to have to figure out. And I think it's tough when all of these guys that are put together for the first time are trying to figure this thing out, and you're doing it with a team that has inexperienced players at this step. And so if there are some warning signs of things that are going poorly or things that you need to do differently, you're not going to know how to handle it with this team. Or one of the other things that I've had, like, maybe it seems silly to worry about this, but Jerome Tang is coming off of this awesome stretch at Baylor where over the last 5 or 6 years, Jerome Tang has dealt with like the elite of the elite in college basketball. And so for a guy like him, like, how does he put back on the hat of realizing that even though KState has some elite talent on their team, he's not coaching the same type of guys that he coached the last 5 years at Baylor. Like, I think having that understanding is big.
I think that's a really good example when you look at last year's Baylor team and what happened to them in the NCAA tournament. Like, they were getting their asses kicked by North Carolina in the round of 32. They were down 20, 25, maybe 30 at one point in the second half of that game, and they fought back, and they maybe should have won that game in the last couple minutes. They just needed a couple shots to fall, got tired. Did they force overtime in that game?
I think they did.
I think they did as well. And I just think that, like, you look back at that Baylor team, and certainly a very good team. They were a 1 seed, but you know, they had like 3.5 healthy players at that point in the season, considering all the injuries they had. So yeah, I like what you pointed out there, Mason. Like, that he doesn't have the luxury of relying on his players to get through the moment when they get punched in the mouth or they allow a run and the entire arena in Greensboro starts cheering for Montana State, because that's what happens in these games. That's what happens. Neutrals start to root for the underdogs. So it'll be really interesting to see how the players and the staff handle that.
Yeah, they did force overtime in that game until they ended up having 3 guys foul out. Thamba, Meyer, and Akinjo all fouled out of the game.
Didn't Meyer go absolutely nuclear in the second half there?
It depends on how you would determine nuclear. He had 10 points.
Okay, so no, he didn't. Someone did, though, I thought.
Well, Adam Flagler had 27, and James Akinjo had 20. And then off the bench, Jeremy Sohan had 15. But yeah, they outscored North Carolina 51-38 in that second half. And I think, you talk about like that team could get it put together, and they had the elite talent to overcome some of that just by saying, you know what, the buck stops here. Like, let's get after it. We've seen K-State blow some first half leads this year and let games get tied again or ultimately end up losing them, like the Texas game or something. Is there a game that we saw them win that they had to come back from this year? Like, of like a significant deficit or more? I guess the Oklahoma State game, maybe they got down, like 7 or 8 a couple times in the second half in Stillwater. But a lot of their games in West Virginia early, like very early in that game.
Yeah, they were on 18-2.
But like second half type where you're down some massive amount at halftime, I don't know that we got that from K-State this year. And so, I mean, I think this team is capable of doing that, but it's just a matter of when we haven't seen something, and this is a weird possibility, but like, it's just making sure that this team if things start to get out of control, that they're able to handle it in that moment, as opposed to just kind of, I guess, call it a wash and be done with it. Similar to kind of what happened with the TCU game. Like, they just were never
TCU
really
twice.
able.
The West Virginia game.
Yeah. They were never able to really get back into it. So I'll be interested to see how they all respond. And honestly, though, like, there is the element where this team is maybe due for one of those games where it's not just Noel and Johnson that are hitting shots. Like, is Cam Carter going to have a game? And it's certainly possible where he hits like a couple of threes for you. Ish Massoud is obviously capable of that. Like, they have some guys that if they're hitting on the right night, things can go really well, and their ceiling is even higher than what it should be with the two players they have in Johnson and Noel. But I just think inexperience is going to be a fascinating thing to watch in this tournament. And the last thing that I'll throw out there is the worst team that they played in since, I guess, the new year started was Florida. They were the number 61 team in KenPom. They handled that game. They were up pretty big. They ended up winning by 14. Montana State is much lower than that. They're 110 in KenPom. So, like, that's kind of what you're looking at here. K-State has been able to handle all these teams. Like, the last time they played a team that was outside of the top 65 in KenPom was Radford. And they went through all those teams this year. So they've been able to handle, like, what I would consider bad teams. Like OU and Tech were bad relative to the league that they were in, but overall they're much better. K-State's been able to handle these inferior teams.
For opponents.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, this is another one of those that should work out in their favor. But there are reasons why Montana State could pose a challenge. And I think for people to be prepared for that. And that's why it's going to be fascinating to see how these guys for K-State end up handling things. So I'm interested to follow along, see how this ends up going down for K-State. And it should be a fascinating time. I mean, you talk about the Q3, Q4 stuff. Montana State is a Q3 opponent. They're worse than Nebraska, better than Wichita State, right in between those teams, essentially, in the quad system. So that's what you should be looking at and thinking of them as, which both of those games were somewhat tight. Like, they put Nebraska away in the end. And then Wichita State, that game was a little tight coming down to the end of it. It's not a good game. Totally a little different circumstance for Wichita State, still early in the season. Everybody was in Texas celebrating a Big 12 football title. But yeah, that's what Montana State is. So even though I think people get concerned because they've seen upsets happen in the NCAA tournament before, and you just never want it to be your team, so you're a little on edge about everything. But in theory, K-State should be able to handle this. And the 14 over the 3, although it has happened, it's not as likely to happen as like the 13 over 4 or anything lesser than that. So K-State should be able to handle this. Honestly, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is how are they going to be able to handle starting a game at 9:40 Eastern? Like, they're playing a game at close to 10 o'clock at night. Where they landed today. So K-State is in Greensboro, North Carolina now.
Their adjustments even worse.
Well, yeah, I mean they lose an hour and then, like, you have to stay up. It's just it's going to be a total mess. And Montana State, they got the leg up. They got a time zone advantage. It's only going to feel like 7:40 to them out there. So watch out for that. Maybe a sluggish start for the Wildcats. They're going to need to wake up a little bit.
Do a little bang energy in them. No, I think what you said there about, I think fans at this time of the year, right? Like, there's such a what if nature to this entire tournament. It's like, well, what if K-State does make it to the Final Four? Yeah, that's not like a super fun one because it is for K-State fans, right? But, like, it's not because they're a 3 seed. Like, that's a very conceivable thing to have happen from a number seeding perspective. But if you're, I don't know, like, if you're Arkansas, for example, like, there's a very, like, possible world where Arkansas puts together all their talent and they make it to the Final Four. Mm-hmm. They have 2 lottery picks. They've got a coach that's been to back-to-back Elite Eights. Like, there's a world where Arkansas does that. Like, that's kind of a fun thing to think about from a national perspective. You don't just have to be an Arkansas fan to think about that being fun. And then there's even other ones too, where it's like, well, what if Mizzou just, like, continues to make a ton of threes? Like, Mizzou could beat out Arizona. Mizzou could probably beat Alabama if they shoot the lights out and Bama has their one bad shooting game and Mizzou goes to the Final Four. Please, dear Lord Jesus, do not let that happen.
That's not going to happen. I don't think you have to worry about Missouri
getting
hot for 4 straight games, but like they could get hot enough. Like they're even enough. They could beat Utah State and then they could get hot and beat Arizona. I don't think they can be hot enough to win 4 straight. Plus,
no, I hope not because I'm not a huge Mizzou basketball person.
I mean, plus wouldn't they have to beat Alabama in that scenario too? And
yeah,
they would think Missouri is going to.
I think that is the most fun area of the entire tournament is the bottom of the South region and whoever gets to come out of it and likely play Bama in the Elite Eight. But yeah, back to the KState kind of discussion here. You know, you don't like to think about the what if of the Wildcats losing to the Bobcats in the first round, but you definitely like to think about the possibility of Kansas State beating Kentucky. Like that's really fun.
That is fun.
Playing a blue blood is a lot of fun, and beating a blue blood is even more fun, even if the said blue blood is a 6 seed and having a down year based off of what their expectations were entering the year and what the expectations are at Kentucky every year. But like, it's still fun to play a blue blood and have an opportunity to beat a blue blood. So it's about handling the moment. And I think it's cliche, and I think that coaches and players say it all the time, and it's boring to hear it. But it's very true. Like this is very much like one game, one play, one day at a time. Like you cannot look ahead. If you look ahead, you're going to get got. And if you lose, you're going to look real stupid. And that's just the last way you want to look at this time of the year.
Yep. Nope, that's true. The last time K-State played Kentucky in the NCAA tournament was obviously 2018. Kentucky was a 5 seed that year. K-State was a 9 seed. So just not that it matters or anything, but it's something worth throwing out there. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, like K-State is capable of getting there. I think the thing that just gets scary for people is that it's Kentucky that's waiting there in the second round. Like it is the name brand.
You can fight them, right? It's Kentucky. You make
them
a lot bigger
exactly
and better
like that's. Yeah, you should like look if you take the name off of it and you look at it, you go, okay, that's a team K-State can beat. They've beaten teams like that this year. They can do it. But it's Kentucky, and you're never going to feel good when you have to play a team like that in the NCAA tournament or anywhere. So we'll see. It's going to be fascinating to watch. And I mean, Kentucky poses some threats there. Although, as we've talked about, like with Kevin Sweeney, or also just some of the other notes, like some of the ways to beat Kentucky do favor K-State. Like they are going to do some things that gives K-State an avenue. Because he talked about guards being able to get the penetration there. And that's where, like, if you cross your fingers and hope that Marquise Noel can get inside, and then if they're collapsing on him, he can kick it out, and you just say, please be making your threes today, Cam Carter, then you're going to be in a really good spot. So there are certainly avenues where K-State can beat them, and there is a reason to think that the Wildcats have somewhat of an edge there. I'm going to be interested to see how K-State's 3-point defense holds up in this NCAA tournament. We know that it was really bad against TCU. Now, some of that was TCU was making shots above the level of what they're accustomed to. So that's something to keep in mind. And K-State, the numbers-wise, has been really good at it this year. But I can tell you, like, eye test-wise, I had not been thrilled with what I saw all season long. And Montana State's a team that'll shoot at about 34% from 3. And then if you get to the second round against Kentucky, like there are some threats there to worry about. I was glad that Kevin Sweeney brought up Antonio Reeves yesterday, because that's the guy that when I look at Kentucky, past Oscar Tshiebwe, that's the dude to me that poses the biggest threat against K-State. So those are just some other things to keep in mind, watch for, and some names to know as we get ready to head into this NCAA tournament this weekend.
Yeah, and I think that there's other players for Kentucky, and there's certain people for Providence. I think a lot of people are just writing Kentucky to the round of 32, and I'd caution you don't do that. Jared Bynum's a good player for Providence. Bryce Hopkins is a really, really, really good player for Providence as well, and I think he's kind of a tough matchup. As someone who stands around 6'9" is shooting over 38% from beyond the arc. Really good athlete, really strong, really good player. So, the round of 32 matchup, whoever it is going to be a tough game. It's going to be against an experienced older head coach who's been in the NCAA tournament for a while. So if Kansas State is fortunate enough to get past Montana State, they'd certainly can't just, eat their cupcakes in the second round, because it's definitely not going to be easy against either the Blue Wildcats or the Friars.
Yep. Yeah, should be interesting. Any other NCAA tournament thoughts before we wind things down here, getting ready for the first full day of games tomorrow, and then everything on Friday, action-wise?
Yeah, just enjoy it. I think that this time of the year is a lot of fun. I think that these first 2 days are maybe the 2 best sports days of the year for a lot of people in this country, and I think it's up there for me personally. I don't know if it's the number 1 day, but it's a lot of fun. This entire weekend is a ton of fun. There's games on. I remember being a kid in school. I think a lot of kids our age, Mason, remember being a kid in middle school and early in high school and trying to sneak our phones for the NCAA Tournament March Madness app so we could see what our team was doing or see what other teams in the country were doing, or begging our cool teachers to put it on as we had free time to do reading or do some homework in class, oftentimes to no avail. But enjoy it. Take off work if you can, or at least have the games on at work if you can. It's a great weekend. Enjoy it. Hopefully you're able to hit a 32 leg parlay on all of your first round picks. Hopefully your bracket's still perfect after the first couple games of the day, and just enjoy it. This is an awesome time of the year, and it's something that I'm really excited for.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to see kind of what it's going to bring this year. Obviously, we've talked a lot about how this is a very open year in college basketball, so we should, hopefully see some craziness happen. And at the end of the day, what you start to tell yourself is, hey, why can't K-State be a part of that crazy? So maybe that's what we're going to hope for and maybe get to see. Big 12 gotta come through if you're the conference and actually win some games here now.
They don't take their nights off.
Yeah, no nights off for the Big 12. See what can get done. I think it's funny that you bring up the being in school and watching the NCAA tournament games. I think that's something that people always have like a really good memory of and thinking about. I can tell you a lot of games that I watched like that. Now, K-State played a lot of games in the evening when I was younger. So like 08, that was a late game against USC that they won. Then they played over the weekend. So whatever. 2010, that was maybe the afternoon game against North Texas. So I got home from school and got to watch the rest of it. And then obviously the next one, they played at night on a Saturday, and they ended up beating BYU, came from behind to beat Jimmer. And then before that, though, that was when Ali Farokhmanesh killed KU. That might be that's a top tier sports night for me growing up. Was sitting around and you're waiting for K-State to play in the NCAA tournament. Only the second time they were playing in the NCAA tournament in my life. And before it all, you got to see KU lose to Northern Iowa. That was pretty insane. And then 2011, I'm trying to think when the Utah State game was. That may have been a watch at school game. I know 2013 Southern Miss, that was a watch at school game. And fortunately, I was able to do that. But I love sports during school. I loved doing anything but school. That's what I'll say. So I hope that anybody out there, well, number one, I hope that you're not in school at 9:40 tomorrow night or on Friday night, because that would suck. But find some ways to cheat if you're not on spring break or something. Now, real quick, another thing that came to my head as we were thinking about like locations and stuff. We're in Greensboro. Do you have an idea of which location you think is going to have the best overall matchups? Because I'll be honest with you, I'm a little disappointed at what we're going to be seeing in Greensboro for like other options of the teams that are there. They don't really excite me all that much.
I think the best
it's Xavier, Kennesaw State, and Iowa State Pitt. Those are the two games before K-State.
The best site to be at is definitely Des Moines.
That's what I said. Des Moines the top dog.
You're just looking at the three nuts fan bases that are there. Like KU travels really well. Arkansas, you're gonna be hearing Woo Pig across the entire arena. And then Illinois fans are nuts, and they're going to travel not very far from Champaign or Chicago area to go see them play Arkansas. So you put those three fan bases in one session, because that's how it's going to be set up there. Yeah. There might not be very many empty seats in Des Moines, and there's oftentimes a lot of empty seats in the round of 64, round of 32 games, if you've ever been able to go to those. So I would not expect very many empty seats in Des Moines. And I think that kind of adds to some of the drama, the theater of the first weekend, especially in Des Moines with those two fan bases there.
Well, and like Texas is going to be there earlier in the day. They are going to play Colgate, who as a 15 would be like the trendy 15 pick if anybody's ballsy enough to do that, because they're going to shoot a lot. So if Colgate got hot, could they take down Texas? And then Penn State and Texas A&M, I think, is going to be a really fun game to watch play out. So that, I think, is a good one. Albany, despite, I think, a lot of people not wanting to have to go to Albany, if you look at the teams that are going to be there, it's Indiana, and they're playing Kent State, which is somewhat of a popular upset pick. UConn has to play Iona, so Rick Pitino going to be coaching there. And then St. Mary's and VCU and Miami and Drake. Like, those are all 4-13 and 5-12 games, but I think all of those are really exciting because I could see any of the 8 teams that have shown up there, I think, have a chance to win. Now, Iona, I think, has the least chance to win a game, but all of them realistically could. And I think that's going to have like the best, just the best percentage of games that are close and entertaining and everything. And then like they're going to have great second round matchups as well. So that one I think is entertaining. And another place that we didn't want to go because it was very, very far was Orlando. But I think they also have a lot of good matchups with the 5-12, 4-13 games that are going to take place there because they have some vulnerable top seeds against some really talented like 12 and 13 seeds. So those were the 3 that I pegged as probably the best locations to go to. I do think, unfortunately, Greensboro is not the worst because the part of the bracket that K-State is in is really strong. Like, you get to see K-State and then Kentucky, Providence, and then whatever you get for a second round matchup should be compelling. But I don't know. Like, some of the other ones I was trying to figure out, Columbus might be one that's not great. Marquette, Vermont, but Michigan State, USC will be fine. Memphis, FAU. So I don't know. Maybe there are some better ones out there that I'm not giving enough credit to. Denver is another one that I wasn't high on as much as I tried, but they might have some sneaky good first round games. But I do think there's a pretty clear cut top 3 locations of teams to be playing in.
Yeah, like I said, I think Des Moines is easily the best just because you look at the environment that's going to be there. I mean, you're looking at 3 fan bases that are widely regarded as being overly invested, I guess you could maybe say, in the outcome that their team has on any given game, not just an NCAA tournament game. And then also just like some of the storylines that are there with Bill Self, and is he going to coach? Is he not going to coach? I know the expectation is that he's going to, but as we record this on Wednesday, I've seen reports that he hasn't been seen at the arena by some of our friends in the Kansas Media Corps. So we'll kind of see if he's there, and obviously KU hoping to defend a national title. And then Arkansas is obviously one of the most talented teams in the country. They've got 2 potential lottery picks, but had a really disappointing season. But again, really passionate fan base. Same kind of story with Illinois, just without the top end talent. And then obviously Texas, and like you said, Colgate being a potential trendy pick to upset the Longhorns. But I think that there's a lot of people maybe nationally who have gravitated to this Texas team. Just given the storylines of Rodney Terry and being able to kind of resurrect the season, maybe not resurrect the season, but keep the train going in a positive direction. And there's a lot of people hoping that he's able to get the job. So there's some fun storylines from all the teams that are sitting in Des Moines. And I think that makes it fun if you're there with a ticket as a neutral or there with a ticket as a fan of one particular program that is there.
Yeah. And I mean, like anything, I said this about the Big 12 tournament. If you show up and you have the first game of the day, you better hope you win, because then the rest of the day is like awesome. Or you want to have the last game of the day and you sit around, watch all these games, enjoy it, and then get your nerves on and everything else that goes with it. So I'll be fascinated to watch and see how all of these end up playing out. Another thing that needs to be discussed real quick, the Wildcats have at least one person that thinks that they are winning a national championship. That's Trae Young of the Atlanta Hawks and formerly the Oklahoma Sooners. I have no idea why Trae Young thought this was a good idea, but he's clearly, even though his school is leaving for the SEC, he's still a Big 12 guy at heart. The Big 12 made Trae Young who he is. He has a Final Four of Baylor and KState and Texas and Kansas, and he has K-State beating Texas in the national championship game. The rest of his bracket, it looks like he did it in a serious manner, but he does have K-State beating Texas in the national championship and an all Big 12 Final Four. So thoughts on the greatest basketball prognosticator of our generation?
I don't understand the whole do a bracket and just do something silly like that. Not that picking Kansas State to win the national title is silly, but 4 Big 12 schools in the Final Four is silly. Like, that's just not going to happen.
If there was ever a year for it to happen, though,
it's not going to happen.
It's not. That was funny when
also I'm going to be upset if that happens because I don't want to watch games that I've seen 2, maybe 3 times already this year. You know what I mean? Games. Like, even if they're good games, like even if they're entertaining, I'm not going to go in there and be like, fire me up, baby.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Kansas, Texas, a 4th time. That would be
like, especially after I've seen Texas donkey stomp them the last 2 times they've played.
I mean, we have said that we want K-State, Texas to play again this year. So there's only one way that can happen.
It's true.
I guess. So we'll have to see how it ends up working out and everything. But yeah, that's hilarious to me that Trae Young just was like, yeah, all Big 12 Final Four. How about it? Probably be good for ticket sales in Houston, though, if all 4 teams are Big 12 teams. So I guess that's one thing to look out for.
So I have a question for you, and then we got to get out of here. Let's say Houston wins the Big 12. Are we going to see banners everywhere from Big 12 people saying they have the last 3 national titles?
Yes. You mean the national championship? Yes. You said the Big 12. I just didn't want you to be confused why I said it like that. Yes. No doubt the Big 12 will take credit for that. Because,
that doesn't count.
Look, the Big 12 can take credit for it if the American is still on all of their ads using things that were done by former American members. Like,
but like, come on, like that's a fuck. Like, that's a fake.
What you can say is you won't say like the Big 12 has produced the last 3 national champions, but the Big 12 is home the last 3 national champions, because that will be true.
All right.
Because, I mean, Houston is not going to play another American Athletic Conference game ever again. So they are a Big 12 team now.
They may go back. We never know with realignment.
I think that I'm pretty confident saying they won't ever go back. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe something crazy will happen. But no, I'm more than confident that we're good there. So. Any other random things you have to throw my way about the NCAA tournament before we get out of here and get going with more games?
No, man.
All right. Well, that will do it. Best of luck to anybody on their travels to Greensboro. If you have to go a distance, Alec and I start the trek tomorrow, that being Thursday. We will be there by Friday afternoon, locked in, ready to go. Should be an entertaining time, and we'll see what the Greensboro bracket ends up doing for K-State, how it works out for them. One other note, if you are not able to make it to Greensboro and you're just going to be hanging out at home, but you still want some postseason basketball, you should probably go to Bramlage Coliseum on Thursday night, because the K-State women are in the WNIT. They are hosting Wichita State. So I can't think of a better way to spend a Thursday night than watching a bunch of Wildcats beat up on some Shockers again. It's the only thing that we want in life come Thursday. So there you go. Go Cats, beat the Shockers, support the women on Thursday in the WNIT, which, by the way, sidebar, nobody cares. The men's NIT got a brand new logo this year. It just flat sucks. It is the grossest thing I've ever watched. But I was happy to see Hofstra beat Rutgers in the NIT yesterday and prove that Rutgers didn't need to be in the NCAA tournament.
Upsets happen.
They do, even in the NIT. Hopefully we see some upsets tomorrow, and hopefully we don't see Arizona State get beat tonight by Nevada. We're just trying to stay strong, support Gabe, and we've got our forks up. So there we go. Did I do it right? Which
your
finger?
Pinky was kind of far out. Your pinky was kind of far out.
I need to go like that. I need to bring it in more.
Yeah, you're kind of like, it's really spread.
Right.
Like, that doesn't really look like a pitchfork, does it? Like, you kind of want to be like a pitchfork.
Looks like it's got something wrong with it. So yeah,
you kind of works out, baby.
Yep. I think I just have a weird pinky that sticks out further. Hold your hand up like that. No, just go with see, my right pinky. My
Does it
left
look like
one
I have really
doesn't do
small
anything.
hands.
Yeah, I think it just depends on where you're holding it at. Like depending on how far back you are,
that looks big. It's back here. It looks
you
pretty
hold it
small.
close. But yeah, no, my right pinky for some reason just shoots out there much further than my left one does.
This is great podcasting.
Yeah, this is a good reason why if you're listening on Spotify or Apple to go check out the YouTube feed. While you're there, you can see us hold our hands up to the camera and check out pinkies and pitchforks and all of that. And then hit the subscribe button while you're there as well, because then that way you know instantly when videos are coming your way from Greensboro and everything else that will take place on Friday night. So that'll do it for us. We will have a little reaction podcast come hell or high water on Friday night. It may be very late or early in the morning on Saturday, but by golly, we're going to do it and bring it to you. So everybody stay tuned and prepared for that. That'll do it for Alec and I for Ema Online. Go check us out over there. And we will talk to you all very, very soon as the Cats get ready for the NCAA tournament.